about Sikkim high
Yes.
altitude.
Okay. Go ahead, have please bring in your coffee or
No, no,
tea or
no. Uh, we were talking about high altitude lichen last time.
yes, yes.
I don't know if you know this is a growth. It comes on rocks and stones. It's like a moss, but little difficult. And though you see in the Tibetan plateau, nothing to eat and nothing to, I mean, there are rivers of sweet water which you can drink, but there are lakes, large number of them are not drinkable. Those lakes are poisonous. If you put fish, they die immediately. There are some lakes which are pure water, very difficult to find. One has to be careful when you're in high altitude areas as to where is the water coming from which you drink. This lichen is the one which yaks and local sheep and goats and asses, if you like, and horses eat. If you and I look at this ground, you really can't see any grass growing on it, but they eat on this very minor lichen sort of thing,
Right.
and they're strong, very highly mobile animals. You must remember Chinggis Khan and his grandson Kublai Khan, 12th to 14th centuries,
Hmm.
conquered the whole of Mongolia and the whole of northern regions of Tibet, right up to Central Asia and even the Russian mainland.
Hmm.
Just had horses which used to feed on this stuff. And the warriors used to only carry dried yak milk,
Right.
converted it into a yak
Cheese.
cheese,
Yeah.
uh, hardened, and which they keep inside their saddlebags and keep going.
Hmm.
And that's all. And they had no logistics. I mean, modern armies must have trains of ammunition and food and supplies and water and so on. Uh, but Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan conquered the whole of that. Kublai Khan was the master of present-day China, the first emperor. Okay. So you have a lot of yaks there, and they're white-tailed yaks and black-tailed yaks. And many times they used to cross from the Chinese Tibetan side onto our side and used to capture these. And I was, in fact, presented two yak skins. The tails have been removed. You see, you have a white tail or a black tail. The black tail is not very sought after, but the white-tailed yak's tail with the brush at the end, which is white, is used in Buddhist monasteries to whisk over the fly whisk over the holy books and things like that, and over the holy lamas. So this is a little description. And another point about the high altitude, I must tell you, in Sikkim, it is shale and rock, not sand. It's not like the Rajasthan desert full of sand. It's shale and rock. With regard digging trenches and getting defenses up is more by a sangar system. Sangar system is that you break rocks, build them up around yourself so that you get a protection from uh, fire, from enemy fire, and you can build bunkers and things. But it's not easy to dig, right? Of course, you can dig in certain places, but for that you require machines, which in my time we didn't have. These are land diggers and things like that. Now, I must tell you about the question of high altitude sickness. It is what happens is that when you're at the normal levels of living in the plains or up to hills up to about 9,000 or 10,000 feet, there is no problem. Your lungs can breathe easily. Once you cross 10,000 or 11,000, you're coming into high altitude regions because of the rarefied atmosphere and the lack of oxygen pressure. The lungs are not able to process the breathing system correctly. In other words, from the plains, they are used to, in the old days, it was 15 pounds per square inch, the pressure of the atmosphere. Now, of course, in kgs per centimeter square, I wouldn't know. And by the time we reach high altitude, it's about 13 pounds per square, or 11 or 12, depending on the height that you've reached. So there are two stages of height. So one is above 10,000 feet, and the next is above 12,000 feet. So acclimatization means that if anybody wants to live higher than 10,000 feet, he has to go through a process of acclimatization, which the army takes about 2 to 3 weeks. That means you live at, say, below 10,000, but to everyday work up to 12,000 feet. Then you come back for the night to 10,000 where you can breathe easy. And then the lungs slowly get used to this procedure and develop the capacity to breathe in high altitude. But if you go from 12,000 to 14,000 and above, then you have to another process of acclimatization, which requires at least 2 weeks. That means you work at above 12,000 up to 14,000 or 15,000, and you sleep below 12,000. That takes time for the lungs to develop. The capacity to breathe this atmosphere, which is at a lighter pressure. Now, amongst the Chinese and the Tibetans, because the Chinese troops live in Tibet, they married some of the local girls, you see. They don't have people coming from the plains and coming there because they have the same people stuck there for life. That's where the Tibetan military basically designed like that. Whereas in our case, we change our battalions around. So every time the unit comes there, it has to go through the acclimatization procedure. And one has to remember that in 1962, we didn't know this. When the Chinese attacked in 62 and we ran, pulmonary edema takes place because if you're not acclimatized and you start living at high altitude, uh, the, the lungs haven't got the capacity to hold less pressure in the lungs. So the blood in the veins, which is pumped into the lung area for refreshment of the in contact with oxygen, it precipitates into the lung through the membrane of the lung because the pressure in the lung is less than the blood pressure. See? So you get liquid buildup inside the lung, which causes you to suffocate. That's called pulmonary edema. The only cure for this is to take you straight away below 10,000 feet or to put you into a pressurized chamber, which a medical unit may have, where you can control the air pressure and you bring back the chap to normal for treatment. If you don't do that, he dies. So now in this acclimatization, we used to have what is known as an operation alert. It's a 2-month period every year where, of course, for instance, in 17 days when I commanded, one brigade was already in high altitude, which is manning the pickets, the high pickets. So they did not require any acclimatization because they were holding pickets up to 16,000 feet. But when we had another brigade in Gangtok itself, which is only about 5,000 or 6,000 feet, and so this brigade, if it moved up there, had to be acclimatized before it went. The third brigade was in Svok Road and Bengal Plains, which required not only moving from the plains up to Gangtok, but then from Gangtok further high into the high altitude region, they required a full period of acclimatization. And the operational alert was that we spent about 2 months, a little less than 2 months, in the high altitude, all of us, from the division commander downwards. So I used to move my headquarters up there also, temporary headquarters, so that in case there is war, you get acclimatized to the business of the way you have to live and fight in the high altitude region. Now, what we found in this procedure of Operation Alert is that the men used to crib a lot, a lot of complaints. I want to go home, I want 2 weeks, 10 days leave, or I want 3 days leave. I have to go and see my wife and child because my child is ill and all that sort of thing. And we found a lot of complaints. Orders were that nobody will go down. You have to spend 2 months up there, that's the training. And therefore, you should have been prepared for it and let the ladies manage their families as best they can in the plains or wherever they are. This problem only arose with the brigade, which was in the plains of Bengal, Sivok Road, and also the brigade which was in Gangtok, because they had some families there. So the brigade in high altitude area didn't have any families with them, so there was no concern. So when I found all these complaints, I told my wife, Surupi, that, look, I think you better look into this. What's the problem? I mean, why are these women cribbing like anything about their husbands being away for 2 months? And if the women don't complain, then the men won't insist on getting some leave. So she did a study. She moved all over these places. She went down to the plains and she talked to all those ladies, JCO's wives and Jawan's wives and all that. And eventually, the people in Gangtok also, their families, and some of the officers' families, to find out what's the problem. So she came out with a whole sheet of paper with about 20 points on it, which I have to do to rectify this problem. And I must give it to her that for the first time I realized that the female viewpoint is very important for the morale of troops. Because every Jawan or officer who fights on the front or has an operational alert or whatever has got a family at the back, either a mother and father or a mother, father, wife, children, you see. And those problems of the family are being projected to him urgently. And therefore, he is not giving his full attention to the battle or to the operational alert or to the exercise or whatever it is. So how do we solve this family problem? According to Srupi's list, there were a number of things I was required to do. Firstly, she said that when the ladies in the Savok Road area left alone, they are in barracks. Some are newlywed, some have just had a baby, some are older. Huh? But what happens is there are a lot of criminal people living in that area, North Bengal. I mean, you must be familiar with all this. These criminal people, or the goons, or the gundas, as we might like to call them, they knock on the girls' doors, 2 o'clock at night, open up. And what is she supposed to do? So there is fear. Second point about little babies and children, because babies do get ill and they have diarrhea, they have all sorts of problems or an infection and they get fever. That's a normal course of events. And they don't know where to go because the man is not there. And so they are feeling helpless. So she said you have to organize proper security patrols in the areas of families which are left behind. For example, she said, let us say there are 6 or 7 barracks where family quarters are there and the ladies are living there with either young or old and with children going to school or whatever. Firstly, the security. In the security, she says, what your units are doing is they leave a small guard for the ammunition dump and the extra weapons and equipment that are left behind when they go for exercises or go for operational alert. Regimental silver, treasure chests, things like that. That guard is insufficient to look after the rest of the families who are there because they're only guarding the quarter guard and other things which every unit has. So that's what she said. You have to have a patrol guard which moves around all these family quarters all night long. And there has to be sufficient strength because the patrol guard cannot last for more than a couple of hours. Then they go to rest and another set of people have to take over. So we worked out the quantum of manpower that has to be left behind to produce patrol guards so that they move around during the night and there's a sense of security amongst the family. And second thing that she suggested, that you have a telephone communication to each barrack so that she can contact the hospital in case of any medical emergency. Somebody's having a baby or somebody's child is ill. And thirdly, is the requirement of transport. That means if somebody is ill or something happens, there should be transport to take that person to the hospital. So we had to leave some transport behind and, driver and so on, with duties. And telephone was placed in every barrack. So the senior lady of the barrack would have a phone connected to the military exchange that is connected to the civil exchange so that they can report to police or they can report to the hospital or consult medical authorities and so on. He says, then there'll be some confidence amongst these ladies to manage their affairs. But if you suddenly all the men disappear, the ladies and their families are left more or less destitute in areas which are not very safe. I enlarged this problem to the Navy and the Air Force also, because the Navy is basically based in naval areas like Bombay or Cochin or Karwa or Visakhapatnam or so and so. They're in a base, and that base is well protected by naval troops. So even if they're out to sea, their families are protected in the base, their schools are inside the base. So the children also can go around there and they are safe and secure. In the case of the Air Force, every Air Force station has a big wall around it. You see? So they have aircraft taking off and coming down in the airfield. But as far as the air base is concerned, it's got a wall surrounding it, 12 feet high, and it's got only one or two gates which are protected by the CRPF or by the Defense Security Corps. And when the children have to go to school outside, there is a bus with protective elements who take the children to the bus, to the school and bring them back. And the hospitals are inside the base. If they have to go to a hospital outside the base, there's a security available for them to go there. So what happens is that the pilot takes off, he goes and crosses the country's borders and has a shot at the enemy, comes back to loving arms at night. That doesn't happen in the army. In the army, you need security. Now, nobody understands this. So we used to provide the security in my division, and I learned for the first time that you have to look after the families to keep the morale of your troops up. And the letters that these ladies used to write to their husbands, whether they are Jawans or whatever, that look, you chaps are enjoying yourself in the high altitude region. What the hell are you doing? You're just playing games. Enjoying a beautiful life with no responsibility. And what about us? What about this lady who's ill or somebody's pregnant and wants attention and such other families are not looking after us? So we should write complaints to the husband, hence they want to leave. So for our second op alert, I followed all the instructions that my wife had laid down. And I must happy to report I had no complaints. Then in order to get these ladies to see what the men are up to in the high altitude, it's not all having good food and doing nothing there. It's a very hard work going on there because you're patrolling, you're doing exercises in high altitude, mock battles and things like that, so that you train. That if it's an attack, what do you do? And so it's a very hard work from morning till night. So what I decided was that I'd like to send these ladies up to the high altitude to meet their husbands over a weekend so that they could see for themselves. So we arranged transport for these ladies. And acclimatization means that you must not spend the night in high altitude. So the ladies from Sugok Road were brought up to Gangtok for a night or two, which is about 6,000 feet, in buses. And then they and their children were taken early in morning to the high altitude area of East Sikkim or North Sikkim, where they were hosted and toasted by their unit and their husbands in their operational areas, which would all be above 12,000 feet, right? And some of them were at 14,000 feet. So they were given picnics and, men took them around, showed them the beautiful mountains that God has provided India. Nowhere else in the world you find such mountains. So it's a great delight to have a look at these. And the steep climbs and the type of work they're doing is appreciated by these ladies. And spend the whole day. And before nightfall, we have to bring them back to the lower altitude so that they don't sleep at night in the high altitude area. After that, they appreciated that the men were doing some work in the high altitude area. And since they had security, there were no further complaints about young bacha being ill or somebody had a fight and somebody beat some bacha up and the ladies were having a scrap or something. So, what is a medical problem? I wanted to explain to you how the army has a different problem than the Air Force and the Navy. And the government says, why do you have batmen and sahayaks? I say, yes, fine, we can remove batmen and sahayaks. They're authorized in the field, but not in peace stations. I said, you put us into cantonment with a high wall around it, get the Defense Security Corps, the CRPF to guard it, with the schools inside and all that. You provide all these facilities for us, and remove the batsmen. But if you can't provide that, then we have to leave. Some troops, every unit had to leave about 7 or 8% of their strength behind. You could change them around over the 2 months so that the new chaps came and you chaps who were there doing protective duties were also trained in high altitude, change them around after 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that, so that everybody got a chance to have the high altitude training, at the same time had the chance to do security work with their families. So that was the lesson we learned, and I progressed this lesson throughout my command in the army, despite political naysayers or anybody else's view, because this is what I believe. Uh, Now I'll tell you about, I told you last time that there were a number of exercises being held by my co-commander to prove me wrong in my views about how to defend Sikkim, which I refused to accept. And eventually the army chief came down, Krishna Rao, and accepted my point of view and changed the military orders. But I had to do a lot of reconnaissance for this to understand how the lay of the land is in not only in East Sikkim, but in North Sikkim. Now, North Sikkim I described to you earlier was the Tisa River, basically. It starts at high altitude towards the eastern boundary of Sikkim at a height of about 17,000 or 16,500 feet. Flows westwards across the part of the Tibetan plain with us, because the valley of the Tisa has been accepted as part of India. And so therefore the valley has a ridge line to the north and the great mountains to the south, where it starts, the Tisa. So the ridge lines to the north are rounded hills, mountains rather, not sharp peaks like the Himalaya, going up to 18,000 odd feet. Tisa is at about 16,500, flows westwards, then it cuts southwards through the great mountains and flows down to Chungtang and then on to through Sikkim into North Bengal plains, and has another tributary coming. There's the two basic valleys in North Sikkim. The western valley, the Lachun Valley, and the eastern valley, the Lachen Valley. The western valley is the Tista. The eastern valley is another drainage system because there's huge ridge lines in between these two valleys, which belong to India. And so these two rivers join, and that at Chungtang, and then the river becomes quite a mighty river, it goes down. So to do this reconnaissance, I used to ask for a helicopter to go and reconnoiter the high altitude areas of North Sikkim. And the Air Force insisted on sending me an Air Force helicopter, whereas I insisted that I must have an Army helicopter. Now I'll tell you the difference between these. Air Force used to say that you are a VIP, you are a Major General, therefore you're not secure flying in a helicopter flown by a military pilot, by an Army pilot. Must be an Air Force pilot. It's more safe. And he follows the rules exactly, whereas the Army pilot may not do so. So I told you, Army pilot is an air OP pilot. I mean, he can bring down artillery fire. So he has to be able to fly his helicopter in the nap of the earth, as it is called. You can come close to the ground, avoid high mountains, go into valleys, go over ridge lines and see the ground on that side, on this side, etc. To see where the artillery fire should be and how to change the way the artillery is being fired so that it hits the target, to control the shells falling on the target. Where the Air Force fire done with that? If you ask him to go from place A to place B, he'll fly like a truck driver from place A to place B. That's all. He doesn't move around anywhere else. So I must say that when there is a casualty which has to be picked up in difficult terrain or in bad weather, the Air Force fighters are tremendous. They have the capability. But what happens is that they have to follow the rules of safety when they're flying a normal aircraft or flying a VIP. They're very, very good. When you're picking up a casualty in the most horrid weather and the most difficult terrain, they land the helicopter, pick up the casualty and bring it back. Compliments for that. But I was doing a reconnaissance, so I said I want an aero helicopter because I want to fly nap of the earth. I want to go around hills and dales and up and down. That's the Air Force pilots don't do. But they said, no, you have to have an Air Force pilot. So I had to have an Air Force pilot. And he took me along the Tista River Valley. He flew across, picked me up at Gangtok helipad. He flew northwards. We left Kanchenjunga on our west, huge mountain, you could see it. We entered the high altitude area from where the Tista exits and flew along the river to the eastern side. And I have a post, Assam Rifles post. I wanted to reconnoiter that border. So I flew over the Assam Rifles post. And then I wanted to come down the second valley. Now, the second valley from the Tibetan Plateau part, we've got about 30 kilometers odd of the Tibetan Plateau on our side, right? So now we were close to the border with China. We were at a height of about 17,000 feet where my post is. And I pointed out to the pilot, I said, that's the pass, which he saw on his map. Now that pass is the Dongkyala Pass. The peaks on both sides are about 22,000, 24,000, but the pass itself is exactly 18,200 feet. Now the problem with this helicopter, it's an elevate helicopter, which we call the Chetak in the Indian Air Force. It's got a big body and all that. It seats two pilots and a passenger on the front, and it can seat three people at the back. At the back, you can even put a stretcher or casualty. So it's a bigger aircraft than the Cheetah. The Cheetah is a stripped down version of the same aircraft at about three-quarters of it, where you can sit only two people in front, the pilot and the co-pilot, and only two passengers at the back. So this was a Cheetah, a little heavy aircraft, and it's a French design. Its ceiling, according to the French, is about 15,000 feet. But naturally, India being India, we are flying it at very high heights, even 18,000 feet, both in Ladakh as well as in east, in Sikkim area or in the Arunachal area. So this pilot was from Ladakh. I'm not going to give you his name because the poor chap, bought it in many ways. But he was used to Ladakh, where the terrain is reasonably flat with ridge lines, which you have to cross. Of course, the terrain may be at a height of 11,000 to 13,000 feet, but ridge lines go up to 14, 15, 18,000 feet. But basically, the terrain is flat. Here, the terrain is up and down because the great mountains of the Himalaya are there, with huge slopes on our side and more gentle slopes on the northern side, the Tibetan side. So he's a bit unused to this. So I saw him hesitate when I pointed out the pass at 18,200. Now we were about 10, 15 kilometers away from the pass. And we were above my post. We circled the post. And I saw the border and the defenses. I said, okay, we can go back now. And let's go back by the Lachen Valley, sorry. So he started going along the earth, just about 200 feet above the earth, going down to the Tista. I said, look here, this is not the way to do it. You better gain a height of 18,000 feet here itself. Then go for the pass. So he said, sir, do you mind? I'm flying my bird and let me fly my bird. Why are you interfering? So I told my ADC, Mike Bhalla at the back, I said, tighten your belt, old chap, because we are in a dangerous situation. So this chap went down, crossed the Tista at about 100 feet above, that's about 16,500. And suddenly the wall of the Himalaya stands up in front. He tried to get his helicopter up, but the southwest monsoon blowing, and he caught in the southwest monsoon and he nearly lost control of the helicopter, but he had to come all the way back to my post. I again told him over the intercom. I said, squadron leader so-and-so, take your height here, 18,000, don't attempt it later. He said, sir, don't interfere in my flight. I said, all right. So he went again, second time. And this time I knew that we were not going to make it. Sure enough, when we came across the great mountain wall, it stands straight like a cliff in front of you, rising from about 17,000 to 18,200. 1,000 feet of wall in front. You see? Sure. Couldn't make it. He tried to turn it around. The southwest monsoon caught him, caught the helicopter. He could hardly control it. And we went down very fast. And I must give it to him that before we crashed, he managed to flare the aircraft. That means he managed to lift the nose up. And we landed on the undercarriage. But the slope is almost a 40-degree slope like this, full of rocks. We crashed into the rocks, and this helicopter did three turtles. The rotors went flying all over the place. The body cracked up. And we came to a halt with the pilot at the bottom, his co-pilot in the center, and I on top. And I looked out of the window and I found that ATF, that's the fuel, was falling down out of the petrol tank because it was tilted. And the red hot exhaust was just 3 inches away. So I knew drop of the ATF hits the red hot exhaust, we all go up in flames. So I opened this door, put my foot on the thing. I had no place to put my foot. I put it on the shoulder of the co-pilot and I jumped out. And I shouted to the pilot to shut the engine because the engine, once it gets declutched, once the rotors break, the engine goes screaming at a very high rate of revolution. I shouted at him to shut off the engine. And I told my ADC who's sitting behind me with the belt on, I said, get out. So I opened the door. I said, get out from the car. He opened the belt and Mike Bhalla went rolling down to the bottom because the aircraft was tilted and he was right behind me. So it's upper end. He fell down to the bottom. And then he looked up at me wondering what to do next. I said, crawl up and get out of the helicopter. So he got out. Then I shouted at the pilots to shut the engines and get out of the helicopter. So they got them out. And then, when a pilot has crashed his aircraft, we are very lucky. There was no blood wound to any of us. Of course, we had been badly shaken up and some bruises. And in fact, I had a big pain in my tailbone because the way it crashed, and I'm sure the two pilots had a similar one. But the Lord be praised, we were all otherwise perfectly fine. So now this was at about 9:30 in the morning. Now what happens in the high altitude is that the clouds start building up from about 11:30, and all the peaks are covered with cloud by 12 o'clock. You cannot fly after 12 in the afternoon because all the peaks are covered with, all the valleys and peaks are covered with cloud, and you won't be able to see where to go. So flying has to be done in the morning. When I looked up to the sun, you see these two pilots from Savok Road in the plains of North Bengal. It's very hot over there. And they don't even wear a vest. See, they just wear an Air Force gown with their chest inside. And the aircraft is got air conditioner, so it's warm inside. But the temperature outside was about 8 Celsius because you're now at 17,400 feet where the crash took place. And I looked up at the sun, slight cloud was building up, and if it covers the sun, the temperature will drop from 8 Celsius to 4 Celsius in just 2 minutes. See? This is high altitude breathing, and your breathing is difficult. Of course, I was acclimatized, and my orders in the division were that anybody who goes on reconnaissance, either by air or by foot, has to wear parka coats. The parka thick coats will keep yourself warm. And so my ADC and I were correctly dressed, but these pilots had only a dangri. They would have died of the cold. So we took the map sheets, theirs and ours, which had talc on it. Talc is made of plastic and thick plastic. So place it on their chest and on their back so that they don't die of the cold. And I said, march, because when you are marching and moving, the blood is moving and less chance of you collapsing. And the pilot squadron leader said, I have to look at my aircraft and make a report. I said, if you want to stay here and look at your aircraft, I'm going, because you will die here. So you should take your choice between dying looking at your aircraft or whether you walk and walk fast. Air Force are not used to very fast walking, but anyway. Luckily, on the Tibetan side of the Great Mountains, the ground is reasonably flat. On our side of the Great Mountains, it's very deep ridges, full of trees, because the monsoon comes from the south, full of trees and ravines and rivulets and things like that, and very craggy hill features and spurs. If you landed on that side, we'd still be there, buried in some unknown spot. But on the Tibetan side, you can more or less walk anywhere to a high altitude and you can go up and down. But the ground is reasonably flat and there are no steep ravines and things like that. So we said, march, we have to march back to my post. So we started marching. And now I knew it would take us about an hour of marching across this plain to reach my post. Couldn't go too fast because you can't breathe very well. And I must give it to my post commander, his Assam Rifles, JSO. They seldom see helicopter or anything. So as the helicopter went over his post, everybody looks at it. And the post commander, the JSO, was looking at it through his binocular. And as the helicopter went toward Donkala Pass, the engine suddenly cut off. So he knew that there's a problem. Now, about 20 kilometers further west, on the plateau, we had a slightly larger post of the Assam Rifles with the major in command. It's the company headquarters. And we had dropped a vehicle over there by parachute. You know, one of these huge American Dodge weapon carriers. It's a six-cylinder vehicle, about four times the size of a Jeep. But what you do is you put four parachutes on it and we dropped it there. And they've been using it because it's instead of marching up and down, the company headquarters needed a vehicle to check on the other four or five posts that he has there. So we had dropped this vehicle. So the chap in his telephone line communication told the company commander that, look, I think something's gone wrong with that helicopter. I don't know who's in it. It seems to be because the engine suddenly cut off. So I am taking a patrol out to pick up the pieces, as one might say. And you send the Gadi. So we had done about an hour's marching towards my post. And I suddenly saw this JC of mine with a patrol of about 7 men coming towards us from the post. And the moment he recognized me as the general officer commanding the division, he came to a attention position and reported the post for inspection. श्रीमान निरीक्षण के लिए हाजिर है. See, so many men, so many weapons, so many this thing, so many casualties. All he had flasks with him and his patrol. I said, what have you got inside the flask? He said, hot coffee. I said, fine, let's sit down and have the hot coffee. In high altitude, you must keep yourself hydrated all the time. So hot coffee was drunk full of sugar and also some salt by all of us so that we felt better. And we sat there in the cold sun. Temperature must have been about 4 Celsius at that time. And after about half an hour, the vehicle from the western side landed up. We got into that and they took us for the rest of the distance to the post. So once I reached the post, I said, please send information to Gangtok that there's been a crash. Helicopter is lying here broken up. And there are two pilots and the general and his ATC requiring to be lifted up before nightfall. Because after nightfall, since you're not acclimatized for 18,000, 17,000 feet, I said, if the helicopter comes, we'll go. Otherwise, all of us are going to march. We're going to march to the western side of the plateau and march along the Tista. It may take us 3 or 4 days, but to keep marching, because if you stop marching, you die of pulmonary edema. You know, when the body is exercising and marching, less chances of your breath stopping and you getting precipitation of blood into the lungs. The answer is to keep moving and no sleeping. Anyway, we were very lucky. There was a very good Air Force pilot, a squadron leader who later became a group captain and then later became an air commodore and became a very good friend of mine. He was one of the top pilots of the Bagdogra Air Force contingent of helicopters. And he happened to be in Gangtok because there was an Aerope helicopter which had become bad and which